Hi, if you are listening to this video, you're probably interested in doing a rent to own. I'm going to be talking today about using private investors to get into a rent to own opportunity in Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas. My name is Elena GARRETT and I am a realtor with Keller Williams Central 75. I work in Dallas-Fort Worth area and I specialize in creative financing for people who do not fit a traditional borrower category for home borrowers. So I work with people who need rent to owns and seller financing to help them to get their dream house. Just in case this is your very first introduction to rent to owns, I differentiate between two types of rent to own opportunities. One opportunity is usually a large national program. There are several programs available. One of them would be a very famous Home Partners of America. Another one would be DV Homes, and I'm going to post links to those types of programs in the description below. The large national programs are very well established, well reviewed. You can read about them. They are less risky and they offer opportunity to choose your own house, but they also offer less flexibility in terms of your credit score, credit history, your income documentation. On the other hand, there are individual investors who also offer programs. So in either case, whether it's a national program or an individual program, so individual investor, in either case, it's kind of like a program. They create a program that makes a financial and legal sense for them. And then they're looking for candidates to make the program filled with applicants. So individual investors are much more likely to work with somebody who has difficulty documenting where their income came from, recent foreclosures, more recent evictions, difficulty with showing credit history, no credit history, a little bit worse credit history, not entirely like 400 FICO score, but they're definitely more lenient and more case by case than a large national program. Why does it matter to you? Well, if you're looking for a rent to own opportunity, you need to decide whether your credit history and your income documentation will be sufficient to go into a safer and more buffered national program, or if due to your credit history or lack of thereof, or large national programs, they require Social Security. You may not have a Social Security, as an example. But you need to decide whether a large national program will work for you, because if it doesn't, then your only choice of getting into rent to own would be through an individual investor. Again, I have an entire channel devoted to creative financing opportunities. If you would poke around, I do recommend that if you want to learn more about large national programs, the video that I have right here on DV Homes rent-to-own process are an excellent place to start. Also, before you decide that you're going to do the rent-to-own path, I do recommend that you watch this video. Watch this before using rent-to-own or seller financing. That's just an educational video that I put out to let you know that there are other alternatives to rent-to-own or seller financing. But I'm not going to spend any more time on my video channel. Let's just jump into the topic and let me tell you a word of caution. Word of caution is anytime you're dealing with an investor who is working with you on some kind of real estate opportunity, just be aware that real estate everywhere is rife with scam, and rent-to-owns can be very rife with scam. So if you would, before you start going to the rent-to-own program of any kind, do a Google search on rent-to-own scams, read about 4 or 5 different pages of results, understand the legal and financial problems that those rent-to-owns programs or rent-to-own situations describe, and only after you understand the legal and financial signs of a scam, then proceed with doing your own rent-to-own. That's my recommendation. I'm going to have a video on rent-to-own scams coming at some kind of time in the future, but right now I have a huge backlog of videos that I still need to post before I get to the scams for rent-to-owns. Before we go into the main subject, let me warn you, if you're planning to do a rent-to-own of any kind, I recommend working, even if you're working with a DV Homes or Home Partners of America, I recommend that you work with a licensed realtor, because you need a voice of experience and caution to guide you through the process. In the rent-to-own or seller financing, you are on your own. You look like a potential prey for an unscrupulous investor, and you will encounter many attempts to defraud you, for example, or sell your house that shouldn't ever be bought for somebody who doesn't know how to do a lot of maintenance. My recommendation, no matter how you proceed, using DV Homes, Home Partners of America, using a private investor, always check with a realtor and ask the realtor's opinion on whether that specific house, that specific arrangement, that specific type of contract should or should not be used, and let the realtor give you their opinion. I actually happen to be one of the very few realtors in Texas or in North Texas that work extensively or try to work extensively with rent-to-owns and seller financing and other creative types of financing. Therefore, during my work with rent-to-owns, I come in contact with many investors who work with rent-to-owns. So if you're looking for an investor, I might have somebody in mind. I might be a good person to contact. Also, I work with multiple rent-to-own programs such as DV Homes and Home Partners of America. So if you think that a program like that would fit you better, I can definitely recommend you which one would fit your situation better than the other. And also, I help to do due diligence work on the house that you're planning to buy. That's just my background. I'm a fraud investigator by training, and I do pre-screen for fraud. My services, if we're working with a program like DV Homes, are going to be free for you. If we're working with an individual investor, you might have to share some part of the my fee, or it may be free for you. It will just depend on that investor. But in any event, I do recommend that you reach out to a realtor of some kind. Now, let me just, without further ado, explain how rent-to-own through individual investors work. So now, after that, you will have a good understanding of what to expect. The individual investor who is working with rent-to-own opportunities is going to interview a number of potential clients looking to get into rent-to-own. So that investor has a chunk of money sitting available to him, and it is possible that he already has a house that maybe is a past rental of his, or maybe it's a house that he flipped and for one reason or another it's not selling. So maybe he is trying to do it as a rent-to-own. But in any event, he probably interviews a number of people. And during the conversation with those people, he tries to determine which one of them would be the best fit for his program, what he's trying to accomplish from the legal standpoint and financial standpoint. Rent-to-own programs are as unique as shoe sizes or as haircuts. Every investor will have his own idea what he wants to see in a program, because every investor will have his own lawyer, his own accountant, giving him the advice that fits his financial and legal situation the best. So just because you've seen or heard or read about one rent-to-own structure doesn't mean that that investor is going to use that structure at all. So eventually the investor decides. So in many cases, the investor will have a house, again, either a rental or maybe a flip that he couldn't sell. But in maybe 50% or even more cases, the investor actually has no house at the moment. He is only in possession of cash. He is not in possession of a house. But he interviews all those people. And let's just say that he picks one couple, whichever couple he picks, out of the people whom he interviewed, and then he structures the deal to fit their finances, and they would have to fit his legal and other requirements. They discuss the requirements. Once they're in agreement, they're happy. Well, maybe not happy, but they're in agreement about the requirements of the program on both sides. Then he either allows them to into the house that he already has, or he asks them to pick a house within their approved rent amount. So with rent to owns, we are working with rents first, because before you can own, you have to rent for a while. So with rent to owns, you are approved for a certain rent amount per month. And that rent amount will determine the size, the price of the house. So if your rent amount is, for example, $1,800 per month, it means that you're probably not getting into a 5-bedroom house in an expensive area of Frisco. You're usually going to find, you'll usually have to work with the investor to find a house that amount of rent would pay his bills, his own carrying costs, plus make whatever profit that he plans to make. So in reality, if your rent is, let's just say, $1,800 a month, you're probably looking to move into a house that would approximately be $150,000 to $160,000. So you're not going to move into a 2-story stone newly built house. You're going to move into a little fixer-upper that's barely standing. That's because rent to own is an expensive way to rent, because it needs to make sufficient profit for the investor to justify the legal risks of rent to own, just FYI. But just to summarize, the investor does not necessarily has a house already secure. He might work with you to determine what kind of house you need, and once your rent amount is established, the one that he feels comfortable that you will be able to afford to pay, he's going to offer you to look for houses in a price category that would justify that rent amount. And let's just say that he chose this couple up here. I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but let's just imagine that this is a couple that he picked. He established that the maximum rent that they can safely pay without being financially stretched would be $1,700. In that case, he would say, if he doesn't already own a house, he would say, find a house that you would be happy with, but the house needs to be no more than $160,000 tops. So those people would then need to go and use me, potentially, or somebody like me, to find a house within 160, 150 price category that would be closest to the one that they hope to obtain. So let's just say that they pick this house with a pink roof, just because I like pink roofs. In that case, when they pick the house, the investor says, okay, the house checks out, the rent will cover my expenses and make me profit. So let me go ahead and borrow money from my bank to buy this house right here. So the investor then goes to his bank issues him a loan, he buys a house that they chose, and now that he is the owner of the house, he now signs a lease agreement with them, and it's a lease with an option to purchase, or lease with the right of the first refusal, or some kind of other lease combination. The lawyers will work out the language. In any event, now these people, after interviewing with him and understanding the financials behind the situation, then they pick a house, and the house is secured for them. And now once he secured the house for these people, he might go to these people or to this people or to this people and say, okay, you're next. Let's see what kind of house we can pick for you. So this is how the individual investors would probably approach rent to own. What does that mean to you? That means that there's certain types of steps that you will need to take to fit the requirement. This is the steps that I suggest. I am not an authority on it. It is just a suggestion. First of all, if you found information about the rent-to-own opportunity in an advertisement, for example, on Facebook or in Craigslist or somewhere else, first check and understand the lingo of the house. Excuse me. First, check to understand the lingo in the ad. Understand what it's trying to say, because a lot of people are very impatient to click and say, is it available? Is it available? Before you click on anything or before you disclose anything about yourself to anybody, read the ad in its full links. If there are any links included in the ad, follow those links and make sure that you read everything that that ad is trying to refer you to. Because first you need to understand, is this actually a good opportunity, or is that potentially a scam or a trap? Because I have to tell you, there is a lot of scams out there. Once you read the ad in full, especially anything that contains numbers, anytime you see any kind of numbers, just zoom in like a hawk on that part and then crunch your numbers. Understand whether or not this is actually workable for you. So for example, if an ad says 10% option fee required, calculate 10% of a house that you plan to own, and then ask yourself, do I have that amount of cash? If it says, for example, that the rent will be $2,000 plus an option fee of this, plus a deposit, plus this, calculate all those numbers together, and then decide, is this even affordable? Or is it even reasonable in my opinion? Once you have some analysis going, you're probably going to have questions that you cannot answer based on your understanding of the ad. Ask those questions and wait for those questions to be answered so you can then clarify in your picture and draw the whole transaction on a piece of paper, saying, okay, this is my down payment, or this is my option fee, this is my monthly payment, this is my repairs payment, or whatever other payment that you need to make. This is the value of the house. Is this a good deal for me or not? Once you ask questions and those questions have been clearly, if you ask questions and those questions are not answered, something is fishy. Something is very fishy. Contact your realtor or contact a realtor that you know and ask her to look at it. Once the situation is more or less clear to you, now understand your exit strategies. What do I mean by that? What's an exit strategy? Exit strategy is what happens when your initial plan doesn't work. So let's say that you look at the numbers and the numbers look like doable, look realistic. Then ask yourself, what happens if something goes wrong? What happens if I change my mind? What happens if I have to move to another area? What would be the situation with me not completing the rent to own and not owning that property? How would I get my money back? Do I get any money back? If yes, then how much of my money do I get? So understand your exit strategies and also ask whoever wrote the ad, if the plan doesn't work out, what happens then? What happens if I cannot complete the rent-to-own program to the end? Understanding your exit strategies is very important because the life is unpredictable, and I must tell you, a lot of people who try to do rent-to-own do not complete their program till full ownership. For one reason or another, they have to exit out of the deal. If you feel that you understood your exit strategy and your questions have been answered, if I am the one who wrote the ad, contact me and say that I am ready to start talking about the situation in more detail and I'm becoming serious. If I'm not the one who wrote, if you just found that ad someplace, online, on Craigslist, on Facebook, send me a text and say, hey, this is a situation that I'm considering. Do you have any thoughts on that? I will do my best to respond Because what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to get in a questionable situation where you might lose your hard-earned money due to an unscrupulous investor. But let's just say that you contacted me, somehow I communicated to you my advice. Then your next step would be to actually gather documents to present them to an investor. So remember, investor will interview more than one person, and he will make his decision, or she will make her decision based on the documents that her potential customers will provide. So if you provide a lot of documents, it might be a better, easier decision for her. If you have very few documents to provide, if you don't want to provide documents, you might not be able to secure her attention or to secure the opportunity to proceed further with the transaction. And she or he will probably tell you, well, I would like to see your, proof of funds, etc., etc. So think about documentation as a way of showing to that investor that out of however many people that investor is interviewing, you're the most worthy one of that transaction. Let's just say that after talking to an investor looks over your paperwork, and then she or he says, I would be able to rent to own up to, let's just say $2,000, right? In that case, you're kind of approved for the program. You're approved for $2,000 per month. So now you need to ask probing questions. First of all, we know the number $2,000, that's clear. How much cash do I need to bring to the transaction? Because $2,000 is only my rents, but usually you also have option fees, deposits, pet deposits. How much total cash will the transaction require? That person, whoever is working with you, whoever is interacting with you, will crunch the numbers and they will say approximately this much. Very good. So let's just say that they tell you for this program to work for you, you would need to have $2,000 in rents every month, plus will require 3% option fee, non-refundable, plus will require up to, let's just say, $300 in repairs, small repairs on a house. I'm just saying hypothetically, not that it will be your deal. So you need to crunch the numbers and say, what is 3% of a house that I want to buy? So for example, if you have $10,000 in your, and you also need to have a 2-month security deposit, 2x month security deposit. So now you need to crunch your numbers, remember? So you need to have at least $2,000 for rent. You need to have at least 2 times 2. As far as security deposit, that's already $4,000. So now you already have $6,000 out, right? And then you have only $4,000 remaining cash left. How much of an option? So if your option is 2%, $2,000 is 2% of what? You're not going to get a house with that cash. So your cash needed to actually proceed with the transaction will in a large part dictate whether or not you can afford a house and whether or not you can afford the transaction at all. Only after you calculate how much cash you have and what kind of a house, given that you need to have an option fee, let's just say 2 or 3% of the total cost of the house. So you will then, your agent or your realtor who is working with you will be able to then quickly calculate how much house can you really afford. And she or he will go and show you the houses that your program conditions, you would fit into this program conditions. Let's just say she will find you, or I will find you a house that's within, $150,000 to $160,000, and that allows you to have the cash available to do the option and to do the security deposit and to start your rents. Once you have the list of houses that fit your program requirements as the investors define them, then you go see the houses and you pick the house that you like the most out of the entire list. And then the work starts. The investor will probably have some lawyers. Those lawyers will be drawing up some contract paperwork. You will hopefully be working with a realtor of some kind to look over the paperwork to make sure that things look legit. It's still not, just because it's been good so far, don't assume that it's not a scam. So process the paperwork. I do recommend that you have your own lawyer glance through the paperwork, even though it might be an additional expense, let's just say an additional $200, $300, or $400. It could be money well spent, because if you go and get into a contract with an unscrupulous investor and you don't understand the contract that you're in, you can very easily be defrauded. Once the paperwork is done, the investor goes, secures money, buys the house, he gets the key, and now after you sign all your lease paperwork, you get the key to your new rental. So that's the process. So what's your takeaway from this? What is your next step? Well, first of all, before you jump with both feet into calculating all the rent to own scenarios, kind of decide whether rent to own is actually the best option for you. Call me and ask me, this is my situation, is the rent to own the best option for me? And I will be able to give you some advice to help you to sort out through your options. Number two, decide if you're going to take a chance on a private investor or if you're going to stick with trying to fit into the large national programs that are a little bit safer. Number three, if you decide that the national programs are not going to work for you because of your credit history or some other situation, the way that you document your income, or if you don't have a social security, then let me know that you need to find a private investor. I probably will have a private investor arranged for you once we have the conversation. Then I will have the conversation with my private investor, connect the two of you, and we can go from there. But in the meantime, just make sure to avoid scams on Facebook. Usually things that sound very, very, very good are too good to be true. Forgot about it. We have a bonus tip. So bonus tip, thank you for staying with me through my long, long rant. The bonus tip is to be realistic about rent to owns. Tip number one, do not worry about the property that you see in the advertisement. So if you see a property in the advertisement and it says something like 3-bedroom, 2-bath in Sunnyvale, Texas, with a great yard and great schools. All right, that is the ad that you're clicking on, but do not worry too much about the actual house in the ad. Why? Well, for one, if you're working with either rent to own through a private investor or through a program, other DV program or Home Partners of America, they have hundreds of houses that you can get in. That specific house is just the house that they picked for the ad. It does not mean that you will be getting into that specific house. You just need to figure out where your price range is as far as being approved for the program. Number two, set yourself for realistic expectations. A lot of people are under a misconception that rent to own is somehow for low income renters. Maybe they're even out of work. Maybe they're even evicted, living on the street. So I have had people contact me and say, hey, I want to get into rent to own. I haven't had a job in several months. I don't have a house right now. I'm living out of my car. Can you get me? And I cannot spend more than 300 or 400 of my income on housing right now. Can you help me to get into rent to own? This is a very unrealistic expectation. Rent to own is much, much, much more expensive than a traditional rental. Why? Because the investors who do rent to own take much more chance. They have to deal with a lot more legal headache. The lawyers and the accountants cost a lot of money. So a rent to own is going to be a more expensive rental than a traditional rental. So if you currently can afford $1,500 in rent and you're comfortable with that, then expect that the rent to own, they will only approve you for $1,300 because they need to make enough margin to justify the rent to own as a legal process for them. So expect that you will have to pay more for a smaller space. Also, when you're buying rent to owns, a lot of people want to have a great new house. Let's just say no later than 2008. It needs to have soaring ceilings and big windows and a large yard for my kids. It needs to be in a quiet area and it needs to be right next to a great school. How much can you afford to pay in rent? Or I can afford to pay about $1,200. Well, then guess what? You're probably not getting into a big house with soaring ceilings and a big yard. You're probably getting into something that costs approximately $100,000 on an open market. So if you want to, so as a mental exercise, take whatever you're comfortable paying in rent right now. Let's just say it's $1,500. Remove $200 from it. Let's just imagine that you're $1,500 minus 200. That would be $1,300. Now multiply it by 100 and it will come up to 130 and now 130,000. And now go online on Zillow and try to find houses in $130,000 price category. And it will tell you approximately what kind of house you are going to be able to buy with a $1,500 rent to own. And you will find out that they will be much smaller, much older, and much, much less attractive than the houses that you dreamed about, unfortunately. That's it for today. Coming up next, I'm going to record 2 more videos this month. One of them will be called What Most People Get Wrong About Rent to Owns. It will be an interesting video that I'm going to gather everybody's who contacted me comments and mistakes, and I'm going to summarize 2-3 top misconceptions about a rent to own process. And the second video will be, is rent to own a good way to go for low income families? In this video, I kind of already hinted at the answer, but I'm going to expand on it in the next video. If you don't want to miss those videos, click like and click subscribe. And then once you subscribe, you will get notifications for every time I upload another video on creative financing for people like you. Contact me if you have any questions whatsoever. My cell phone number, my email address, and my Facebook group. So I actually have my own Facebook group. Yes, it's called Rent to Own DFW. I'm the owner of a I'm an owner of a Facebook group where people can see different rent to own opportunities, and sometimes I post private investors looking for clients. And my website is elenagarrett.com. I am truly hopeful that in 2021, when we're recording this video, you will be actually able to move on with the process and actualize your dreams and get the key to your house sometime this year. And if you need help with any part of this process, I'm here for you. Thank you so much for watching.